Our first guest today is Michael Hudson, professor of economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Now, Dr. Hudson is also a sharp critic of what he considers is the rent-seeking behavior, which has become the dominant form of the world global financial markets. Now, once upon a time, governments regularly expunged debts to prevent the crisis and turmoil that over-indebtedness ultimately causes. But then came the Romans, and for them, a debt was a debt was a debt. No forgiveness there. And since then, it's become standard fare to enforce debt contracts, even when they are totally and completely unpayable. Hudson now sees a parasitic financial industry that looks only to determine how much wealth it can extract. There's an old adage, debts that can't be repaid won't be repaid. I asked Dr. Hudson to explain what historically happened when private debts grew too large to be repaid.
There are a large range of scenarios for what happens when debts can't be paid. For the first 2,000 years, from about 4,000 BC to 0 BC, you had normally most debts owed by cultivators on the land. Most citizens had their own land, and most debts were owed by individuals to palace collectors for agricultural inputs, either for land rent or for water or for shipping the crops or for draft animals. And periodically, there would be failures of debts as a result, crop failures. And so the debts couldn't be paid. So it was normal for every ruler who came to office in Sumer, in Babylonia, and in their neighbors, to start off the first full year on the throne by proclaiming an amnesty for debts. They'd say the idea is that they realized that debts really are unpaid bills. Most of them were unpaid bills to the government, what you'd now call tax bills. And economies tended to run up more and more debts, so that rulers would say, okay, what we're going to do is declare a clean slate. We're going to make things in equilibrium the way they were in the beginning, and we're going to wipe out the consumer debts, not the business debts or the commercial debts. People who are rich enough to invest in trade ventures could afford to lose the money. But the debts of citizens, the personal debts, would all be wiped out, and you'd have a clean slate and begin all over again in equilibrium.
This actually leads perfectly to my next question. Now, the idea of canceling debt, it isn't revolutionary, exactly as you just explained. But why aren't banks canceling private debt and conducting massive credit write-downs today?
Because if you cancel somebody's debts, you cancel somebody else's savings. In today's economies, 99% of the population owe debts to 1% of the population. And the 1% is using this as a leverage. In Europe, the 1% lends money to governments. They don't want the government to pay. They want the government to be like Detroit or Chicago and say, you can't pay, so if you're Chicago, sell off your sidewalks and let us put parking lots there. Sell off your roads and let us privatize them. If you're Greece, you say, sell off the Pantheon, sell off your tourist lands, sell off your oil rights, sell off your electric company, sell off your ports to us. So debt has been used all throughout history is a means of foreclosing on property and transferring property from the debtor to the creditor. And that's how almost all of the wealthy oligarchies in every country of the world in history have got rich, by foreclosing, by making a loan and then foreclosing on the assets and impoverishing the other people. And that's the business plan we have today.
Right. Now, does the fact that these debts are owed to private agents, banks, instead of the state, make any difference in whether the debts get canceled?
It makes all the difference, because if you're the government, a government can cancel debts that are owed to itself, and everybody's happy. Even in Rome, under the emperors, one of the emperors issued a coin, and the coin was the Roman emperor burning the tax records. It's easy to cancel debts that somebody owes to you, but once debts are owed to an oligarchy, to private individuals, if you're the government and you cancel debts owed to the private individuals, then the oligarchy is going to come and kill you. And that's what they did in Rome. When there was pressure to cancel debts in Rome, the debt advocates were simply murdered, just as they were in Chile when you had socialists come into power, and just as advocates of debt cancellation throughout history have been killed by the creditors. They've always used violence to enforce the collection of debt.
Now, you've said that private banks are, in effect, operating as oligarchies, but, they're not killing anyone right now. But can you explain this further?
Well, most of the banks are owned by the 1% or agents of the 1%. The job of the banks is to take deposits, and I think in America, you have since 2007, the breakdown, 95% of all of the income growth in the United States has occurred to just 1% of the population, according to the Congressional Research Service. So that all of this income growth of the 1% is put in the banks to lend out to the 99%. So the banks essentially are intermediaries making loans to indebt the 99% further to the 1%, and that's how the 1% gets rich.
Now, why haven't the Germans realized that history is repeating itself with Greece in the role of perpetual debtor that Germany was after World War I? They're in the position, Greece is in the position Germany was. Why aren't they seeing this?
This is really amazing. You put your finger on the point. Why on earth? It's almost you can't teach German history in Germany without being fired. There's one of the group that I work with is the Buckler Foundation, which is the labor union. And if people try to talk about German reparations and the inability to pay, and the whole theory of the ability to pay was developed by John Maynard Keynes, Harold Moulton, and others in response to the German reparations problem. All of a sudden, the Germans have been given a false history. If you look at their textbooks and the propaganda that the banks are pushing month after month and year after year, they pretend that if banks would actually, if the government would lend money, and if a central bank would actually finance the government deficit instead of the government borrowing from the wealthy people in the banks, then you'd have hyperinflation. The false memory in Germany is as if the hyperinflation came from too much public spending.
Will the euro break up?
Well, the question is, if it doesn't break up, then you're going to have a continued immigration of labor from the countries that are imposing austerity. Let's say, what happens if the euro does not break up? You're going to have the situation in Greece, where 1/10 of the population has already emigrated. In Latvia, which has just joined the euro this month, you've had 10% of the population emigrate since 2008 as a result, and Latvia is considered the neoliberal miracle of Europe. In Ireland, almost 10% of the population has emigrated since the breakdown in 2008. So if countries remain in the euro, they're going to have to submit to austerity. They're going to have their taxes go up essentially to pay foreign creditors. And just yesterday in Britain, the Conservative Chancellor of the Exchequer, John Osborne, told a conference that the risk to Europe isn't people criticizing the financial austerity program that they're coming up. The risk, he said, comes from the failure to reform and renegotiate. And the Conservative Party, not the left, but the Conservative Party in England, are now the Eurosceptics and are saying, look, we're all in favor of European integration. Nobody in Europe wants war anymore. But what we don't want is the euro. And if European integration doesn't mean peace, it doesn't mean socialism, it doesn't mean rising living standards, it means austerity for labor, it means falling wages, it means falling living standards, and it means if your labor wants work, you're going to have to emigrate. We're going to empty out Ukraine when it joins. We're going to empty out Latvia, as we've emptied out Estonia, and you're going to end up a depopulated desert. That's what's in store for you if you remain in Europe. Yes, so there's been a bait and switch. They promised Europe that it would be social, democratic, raising living standards. Instead, it's an iron-fisted financial oligarchy that's wrecking country after country, as you can see in Ireland, Greece, and Latvia.
That was Michael Hudson, economics professor at the University of Missouri, Kansas City.